Jimlee for me is one of the most influential comic book artists of all time. He has kind of defined the superhero, the contemporary superhero look, and a lot of artists have gotten inspired by Jim Lee's art style and his artworks in general. He has worked with Marvel, he has worked with DC, he co-founded Image Comics, I believe, and you know, the, um, he has done a lot of like important works. I believe he's even the like creative director in DC at the moment, and he does has a really nice Twitch channel where you can watch him work and watch him discuss about life and things in general and comics in general. He's one of my favorite artists. I suggest you check him out as often as possible. And today I'm going to be talking about the things I've learned from just looking at his art and copying his art. And when I copy these artists, or when I try to study this artist, what I'm talking about is that I try to use my own characters or characters that I have. I would encourage you to have your own characters, or as they call it, OC, that you work on, so that you have something that you can look forward to, or a story that you're creating. You can even create your own character on the spot. It doesn't need to be anything special, just something that you focus on, so that whenever you are drawing, the reason I make this choice is that when I'm drawing my comic, it's kind of easy for me to translate the things that I've learned into these characters, because that is what I want to do. That is the purpose of the study. The purpose of the study is to improve. The purpose of the study is to steal and adopt some of these techniques and creative choices that these characters have into my own work, and that is what I try to do, to be honest. I don't always do it perfectly, but I try to do it as often as possible, and I try to work on it every single time. Things like that. So what I would encourage is that before I study art styles, what I've tried to do is I've tried to understand the fundamentals or the basics of drawing in general. I'm not saying you need to always do this. You just sort of need to understand structure, because I tend to focus a lot more on characters. I like drawing characters. I like drawing poses. I like doing character designs, and that is what I tend to focus on a lot more. Right. So before drawing characters, I did structure studies and anatomy studies to sort of understand how the muscles work, how form works, how like simple poses works, how to construct, how to break down poses and things like that. So that when I'm looking at these artists now, when I'm looking at their art style, when I'm looking at the decisions that they've made whenever they are doing their drawings, like the consistent decisions that they make, which makes their line language and their line work unique, and it stands out from other artists. When I'm looking at that, I'm then able to I don't have to worry about how to form the muscles and things like that. I just have to worry about like things like that I'll just point out when they're drawing, like with the faces, like decisions they make when they draw the eyes, decisions they make when they draw the head, decisions they make when they draw the muscles, the torso and things like that, and how they draw that in relations to the environment, like a background, and like the poses they are doing and other characters, how they draw male versus female, right? Simple things like that, and that is what I do. And then also inking as well, the rendering decisions that they make, the cross hatching and the hatching lines that they do. So that is sort of how I do my studies. And over here, there's a Nightwing drawing, and then there is a Superman pose that I copied. And one thing I noticed about him is that the way I draw is that I deconstruct things with simple shapes. So if excuse me. So whenever I want to break a pose, I just use a circle and use a sphere, a circle or sphere, and I use boxes, and then I use a box. I could use a box, so I just use an underwear shape to break down a character's pose, and then I use cylinders, things like this, to make it simple, right? This is the base. This is structure, right? This is basic structure, right? And then from there, what you can then do is that you can then begin adding the anatomy, depending on the pose that you've drawn. You can then begin adding the pectoralis major and things like that. But that's not what we're here to talk about. We're here to talk about Jimlee and what makes his work special, unique, and things like that. And it's the same thing, kind of the same thing with every other comic book artist, to be honest. Jimlee has great intentional cross-hatching lines. That is what the first thing I'm going to note. Because last work, I talked about Danmora. In the last video, I talked about Danmora, and let me just show you, because I'm looking for the Joker piece that I talked about. I showed a Joker, a drawing of the Joker, and I showed like his cross-hatching. Yeah, it wasn't this one in particular. Yeah, it was this one. I showed Dan Mora's cross-hatching, and if you look at the way he draws faces, the way Dan Mora draws faces, in comparison to Jimlee, you would see that he does a lot more rendering than Dan Mora does. If you look at his faces are very detailed. He does use exaggerated anatomy most times. His anatomy is perfect. I won't say it's perfect, it's like really good, but most times in different angles, the anatomy has to be invented. I would call it invented anatomy, right? But it still looks good. It could deceive you. But if you look at his face, the faces that he draws, he adds a lot of rendering and hatches to it, uses shadows really well. But like I said in my last video, that with the women, he doesn't add a lot of shadows to the women, because you have to make, even though the women are badass, he has to make them softer, to look softer and to look pretty. You don't want to be drawing an ugly woman, and one way to like mess up a good drawing of a woman is to add so much hatching lines on the face. You have to know how to put the contrast, proper contrast on the face. Yeah, so another thing I like about his work is his high impact poses, because his poses are so dynamic, are so cool to look at. At least in every single comic book issue, you would see at least 20 good poses that you like, that you probably want to draw and mimic and use for your own character. So poses like this really inspire me, and they're really fun, and I sort of take note of them when drawing. This is a pretty popular one that people have seen a lot, Superman. I believe this was a Justice League. This was Justice League drawing. Yeah, so like he uses blacks and textures a lot. He doesn't use, I wouldn't say he uses black as much as David Finch uses blacks, but he is pretty liberal with how much he uses the blacks that he uses. And his rendering technique is one of my favorites in comics. And these are some old works that he has done. This is a much more recent one. The way he draws metals as well is also really amazing. What's that? It's extremely detailed. He has intentional line work, and the anatomy. He uses a lot of hatching lines to actually define the anatomy. He has great use of line weight, thick to thin lines, and his characters' faces especially. The faces are one of the most unique things that he does. Like, it's probably one of the most recognizable faces from comic book artists. I think in the history of comics, one of the most recognizable faces. I think Damora is getting there as well. If you look at the characters, they have this iconic superhero look to them. They have these like jaw lines that could split an atom, and they have this consistent look to them. I won't say there's like a same face syndrome, because he does know how to like differentiate between characters of like ethnicities and characters, like to separate characters is what I'm trying to say. Yeah, great composition. Like his comics, whenever you look at his comic book pages, like they feel full, they feel epic. Even when he's doing like things like negative space drawings, there's a sort of like visual intensity to his work whenever you're looking at them. And the best way to, like I say, and I keep saying it and I keep preaching it, the best way to learn from these artists is to copy them. And copying is studying. Whether you notice that or not, your subconscious is noting it. And whenever you are then drawing your own work, your own original work, you'll notice that you're going to notice these decisions and begin to apply it in your work, because you draw a lot of faces if you're drawing comic books. And since if you've drawn a lot of Jimlee's faces, you're going to begin to make those decisions as well. But I would encourage you to try and understand the basics of drawing a face, the basics of drawing an arm, the basics of drawing a torso, the basics of drawing the legs, and other limbs in the human body, so that you can, because you're not going to like every single artistic decision that the artist makes. You're just not. So it is better to understand the basics, to know how to draw a face or how to draw these body parts. Learn the basics, how to draw it realistically, so that when you then come to apply this knowledge, the knowledge of this artist, to copy them, and when you are then applying, you can then pick what you want from them and then leave out what you don't want from them. And it's the same thing I do, because I have several artists that I like, and there are several things that I pick from these artists that I like, right? These different artists that I like. So like Jimlee, I like his poses, and I could pick the same thing from two different artists and just mix and match it together to form my own style. Haven't formed my own comic art style yet, I would say, because I haven't done enough comics. You need to do enough comics for you to actually get a proper art style, I would say. Because when I talk about, because there was a time I was doing portrait drawing, and I would say that I formed my own art style in terms of like doing portraits. Right, when I was doing portraits, the artists that I looked up to were Mazarat and maybe Ruiz. And these two artists are the artists I copied their artwork a lot. I didn't copy it in the sense of like copying their paintings. Ideally, that is what you should do, but I was just too lazy to do it, to be honest. I just didn't want to just copy their paintings verbatim. But that is how master studies are done. They are called master studies. You could just copy exactly what the artist has done. Right, but what I prefer to do was that I just noted like the shape language of their paintings, and then I just adopted it into mine, and then I formed my own art style. It's pretty simplistic, straight to the point, and that is how I improved my portrait drawings. And my portrait art style is quite different from my comic book art style, maybe to change in the future, but yeah, that is the artistic choices I make. Yeah, so that is it for Jimlee. Jimlee, he has there are a lot of pros to his art style, but most especially the way he draws characters' faces are really cool. Quite similar to Damora in my own opinion. So like if you are a comic book artist and you're struggling with comic book art or art styles, learn the fundamentals and then look at Jimlee's faces. Copy it as often as possible. It will probably be trash. What you draw is going to be awful. It's going to look terrible. But the more you do it, the better you will be. And one way to actually get better at it is to work on the construction. Your Andrew Loomis or your Riley method of drawing the face. You work on that over and over and over again, and eventually you will draw good faces, and then you can then translate Jimlee's art style or Damora's art style or whoever's art style that you like, Jorge Jimenez, that may be your preference, or even like anime art style in general, into your own art, and you'll be a better artist. And I also look at these artists in terms of like things like perspective, but I don't look at that a lot. I look at it sometimes, but I don't look at it a lot because my perspective sucks, but I do still try to take things from them and apply it to my work. Yeah, that's it for this video. I really appreciate every single person that has tuned in. If you like this type of content, me just rambling about comic book artists and things that I've learned, because these are things that I've learned in the live. I just download the pictures and then on the live I pick one and then draw. If you like this type of content, please give the video a like. I really appreciate it. We're trying to get to 2K. So help a brother out. I need to make money from YouTube, man. Help me out. Come on, help me out. Just like the video if you haven't. And if you tuned in, every single person, all 50 of you, I really appreciate you. And I'll see you in the next video. Peace out.